Hello, and welcome to this webinar presented by the volunteers of the IET's Cambridge Local Network. We represent folks in the Cambridgeshire area, but we're always very pleased to welcome the other people that are interested from across the UK and indeed globally. My name is Phil Zerngost. I'm the chair of the local network, and I will be your host tonight. Now, before we get underway, I'll just cover some housekeeping points. You can ask questions, but we'll leave the answers to the end of the presentation, please. And please use the Q&A button for that, not the chat button, please. The Q&A button is at the bottom of the screen, and you'll see it if you wiggle your cursor. We're recording the event, and that'll be available on our YouTube channel, which you can find by searching for IET Cambridge. And that'll be there in a few days' time. Now for CPD certificates, we always get a lot of interest in those. Please email us at camsec.co camsec@gmx.com, and we'll put that email address up during the presentation. And finally, I'll mention our next event, which is on the subject of robotics. And that will be on the 17th of March. Now, on to tonight's event. And I'll hand over to my colleague, Annie Liu, who will introduce our speaker. Annie.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Rob Thompson this evening. Rob has been a packaging technologist since 2002, and working with several companies, including bars, soft drinks, before coming back to Co-op, whom Rob had worked for on a part-time basis in his early career. Rob's current position as a packaging manager at Coop Food, which is part of the Co-op Ethics, Sustainability and Policy team. Rob advises on sustainable packaging material choices, leading Co-op commitment in recyclable packaging materials, and developing Co-op strategy on plastic pollution. Without further ado, I will now hand over to Rob.
Thank you, Annie. So welcome. I will just share my screen and we'll get underway. So yeah, my name's Rob. I am the packaging manager, as you were saying, at the Co-op. I've been at the Co-op now for 5.5 years-ish, and I joined just as we were starting our journey on packaging recyclability. So what I'm going to show you goes back a little bit further in time, since before I started, when my former colleague Ian Ferguson was in charge of packaging and recyclability at the Co-op at the time. Ian left us at the middle of last year. So yeah, this is just a bit of a talk about how we have made all of our own brand food packaging recyclable over the last 5.5 years. The picture that I've put on there in the middle, that's a pecan nut, which is a hard nut to crack, which is sort of an analogy for this project, really. But we managed to get there in the end. Took me half a decade, but yeah. So first of all, a little bit about the Co-op. So we were established in 1844 by the Rochdale Pioneers. We are the world's largest consumer cooperative. We have currently about 5 million members, and we are owned by our members. So we're still a member-owned organisation. It's cost £1 to become a member of the Co-op since 1844. We are the UK's 5th biggest food retailer. We have about 3,200 local stores. We're also a wholesaler. So right from its inception, the Co-op has been a wholesaler. We currently supply to all of the independent cooperative societies in the UK, of which there are around 12. And we also own the wholesale business for NICER, which supplies Co-op brand products to around 3,000 independent traders. We're also a provider of funeral care services, and we're the UK's #1 funeral care provider. And we have legal services businesses as well, providing things like probate services. So all in all, the Co-op employs around 70,000 people. And our mission is to meet our members' needs and to stand up for the things that they believe in. So one of those things is recyclability of our packaging. And 5 years ago, we were given a mandate by the Co-op membership, our AGM, to spend some of our members' money on improving the recyclability status of the packaging substrates that we use for our own brand products. So this journey really started in 2013 when we started to talk to local authorities, of which there were at the time 391, all of which had very different ways of collecting materials, all collecting different materials, doing different things with them in different coloured bins, sometimes not even using bins, sometimes using crates, sometimes using bags, giving different advice to householders. And we still do have that in the UK. It's got a little bit better since 2013, but we still do have a wide range of methods of collecting materials for recyclability. So the first thing we started to do was to talk to local authorities to find out what were the materials that they were collecting, what were they doing with them. And like I say, there is a wide range of outcomes. So in the Northwest, in Greater Manchester, for example, the local authority here will only collect plastics that are in the shape of a bottle. They don't collect any film or trays. They actually have printed in massive words on the side of the collection vehicles, if you want to recycle plastic, it's got to be a bottle, which I think might be problematic for them in the future when consistency of collection legislation comes into force, and they will be mandated to start collecting those materials at curbside. So the next thing then we did was, once we talked to the local authorities and found out about the infrastructure of the recycling side, we started to talk to our suppliers, find out what were the materials that they were using, started to talk to external agencies like the Waste and Resources Action Programme, the Local Authority Recycling Advisory Council, and the Chartered Institutes of Waste Management. These included some of the big waste management companies, and we were talking to people like Viridor, Biffa, Suez, Veolia. They're the big 4 waste management companies really in the UK, to find out what are the things that we put onto the market that cause them problems. Once we'd done that, we then started to talk to the recyclers, people like Smurfit Kappa, J-Plas, Cedo Recycling, Cleantech. These are all UK recyclers actively recycling materials, to find out what could we do better in terms of the material constructions that we were putting onto the market to help them recycle better and to help them increase the value of the outputs from their operations. We came up with a plan. We started to sense check it again with some of those external organisations like CIWM, LARAC. We started to talk to people at packaging exhibitions, at the Recoup conference. We've been members of Recoup. Recoup is Recycling of Used Plastics Limited. It's a charity. But we also talk actively to the British Plastics Federation, and then agencies like Greenpeace, Zero Waste Scotland, and the Environmental Services Authority. And all of that came to a kind of a report that we put out that we called Tipping Point. And this highlighted the scandal that 2/3 of Britain's recyclable plastic packaging was not being recycled. This was in November 2016, so it was shortly before Blue Planet 2 and media interest and citizen interest started to really pick up in the space of plastics and recycling. So what did those recyclers tell us about the materials that we were using? Well, they said that recycling capacity in the UK is restricted, and that prevents more materials from being recycled. So at the time, probably still currently now, there was only enough capacity to recycle around 30% of all the material that was being put onto the market. So because most of the focus was on plastics, we developed a policy to include at least 50% recycled content in rigid plastics, so PET and HDPE. These are the materials that we use in soft drink bottles and milk bottles, with a view to become the market for our own recycler. And the idea behind that was that it would give the recyclers more confidence to invest in recycling infrastructure, because they would have more confidence that there was a market to put that recycler back into. The second thing they said was that poor labelling stops plastics from being recycled correctly. So we started to engage with On-Pack Recycling Label Limited to change the labelling for pots, tubs and trays, and then films. So at the time when we started this work, the only plastics that you could put a recycling label on were bottles. We developed a spreadsheet that tracked what all of those 391 local authorities were doing. When we got to 75% of councils collecting those materials for recycling, which is the threshold for the OPRL label to change to, as it was at the time, widely recycled, then we got onto OPRL and said, look, here's the evidence. We've been tracking what the local authorities do. We need to start now labelling these materials for collection, because they are being collected and we know that they're being recycled. Films, again, similar story. So that firstly changed on polyethylene films to collect in store with carrier bags. And then from January this year, with the work that we've done on soft plastics collections, we can now use a label that says recycle at store, recycle at store, well, larger supermarkets, not at curbside, I think it says. But that recycle, the green swoosh, can now be used on PP films and PE films, which is probably around 70% of all the film material that we use on our packaging. The third thing they said was that there are certain types of polymers that really cause problems in the recycling. They said that PVC is problematic because the chlorine is corrosive to the recycling equipment. Polystyrene makes up around 1% of all the plastics that are used in the UK, and therefore not many councils are collecting that material for recycling. It is actually quite a good recyclable and lightweight material, polystyrene, but because it only makes up 1% of the market, the councils don't want to segregate that material. No, they want to have nice clean streams of rigid PET and HDPE and polypropylene. And they said that those materials have low market value, which disincentivizes that recycling. So we started to narrow down our polymer range and align it to what it was that the recyclers wanted. They said that poor packaging design reduces recyclability. So we were using a lot of non-detectable CPET, so that's crystalline polyethylene terephthalate. We were putting carbon black master batch into our plastics, which were stopping them from being detected by the near infrared detectors at the recycling sites. We were using multi-layer trays. So we were using, for example, PET, which had a PE sealing layer on it in a bacon tray, for example. And then when that film material seals to the PET, once it's removed, you end up with a mixed material base web. So what we started to do was move those sealing layers off the tray and onto the film, so that the PET then becomes monomaterial and it's much more compatible with recycling. And they said that sleeves, full length sleeves on bottles were problematic because they prevent the material from being accurately detected through near infrared detection. And that's problematic whether you use the same material as the bottle or a different material as the bottle. If you use a different material, it means that the PET goes into the wrong stream. If you use the same material, it means that that film is not compatible with the rigid PET recycling, because once that material is being chipped and it goes into the wash line, what tends to happen is that those films are blown off when they get into the drying stage of the wash line. So either way, putting a sleeve on that obscures the base material is problematic. So we remove heat seal layers. We don't use full sleeves. We've taken colour out of our rigid plastics, and we've removed the non-detectable additives from our plastics. So on our CPET trays, for example, now, we did actually come out of CPET altogether at one point. But once the manufacturers of the trays were able to show us that those trays were detectable and that they were using recyclate that had come from trays back in them, then we went back into CPET, but we only use detectable pigments. They said that there was no disposal route for compostable plastics. So we don't use compostables in our mainline primary packaging. We have a few examples where that is the right thing to do, where we know that those materials are going to end up in food waste. So that includes things like tea bags, carrier bags, which are used as a food waste caddy liner, and the small labels that you get on fruit, where people will peel an orange, for example, and compost the peel with the label still attached. So those were previously polypropylene. We reckon we were putting probably around 2 tons a year of polypropylene just through those little fruit labels into food waste. So we've switched all of those now into, I think we've still got bananas to do, but we've switched most of those into compostable PLU labels. Things that go into sewers as well is another issue. So things that go into water courses. We've taken the plastic out of our wet wipes, for example, because even though we don't advocate and we don't use the fine to flush label, that people flush those. We know that people do. And then the material value was really the main thing that drives recyclability. So if it's not in the interests of a recycler to recycle something, it won't get recycled. So that's one of the big things that people don't often realize about the recycling industry. Recycling is not a service, it's a business. So clear PET, non-black polypropylene, PE film, these were commercially viable materials that the recyclers wanted to recycle. PET goes back into bottles and trays. PP generally goes into non-food items like buckets and automotive parts, drain pipes, and PE film goes into bags and sacks. So we're starting to substitute those hard to recycle materials with things that add value to a circular economy for plastics. So what happened after that was Blue Planet 2 was on the TV. Then Greenpeace published their survey into retailers' use of plastics. Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall started his war on plastic, and the kind of anti-plastic agenda really took off at that point. For the co-op, we've always sort of hovered somewhere in the middle of the Greenpeace survey. You do find that retailers tend to move around a lot, depending on what the EIA have decided to include in the metrics for that year. So if you look at Iceland, for example, the first year, they said, what's your target on plastic removal? Iceland said 100% over 5 years. That's great. You get the top spot. 2 years later, they were in 10th place because they weren't able to deliver on that commitment. So for the co-op, we've always been very realistic and said we believe that plastics have a place in the circular economy, and we've always kind of hovered somewhere in the middle. We changed the way that we measure recyclability as well when we launched Tipping Point. So in the past, we used to say that 80% of our material, this is total packaging material, by weight is recyclable. That sounds pretty good. But if you look at it from a customer's point of view, they're not looking at the total weight of material. They're looking at product by product as they walk around the shop. So to a customer, a pot of soup or a crisp bag or a bread bag or a sweet bag has the same weighting in recyclability terms as something which might be 200 or 300 times more weighty than it, like a Prosecco bottle or a steel can for beans. So we decided to change the way that we measure our recyclability. So we moved to a SKU count level. And when we looked at it by SKU count rather than weight, only 46% of our items or our SKUs were recyclable. SKU is the stock keeping unit. So that sort of changed our focus away from, well, we're doing okay, to, well, we're not really doing okay. We need to put a bit more focus on this. So we aligned more with circular thinking at that point, trying to design things that were compatible with what the local authorities wanted to collect, that were designed for recycling in the future. And we changed our unit of measure to match the customer experience when they walk around one of our shops. So at that time, we launched our corporate sustainability ambition, which is called the Future of Food. The Future of Food has 3 chapters. First one is all about the products that we sell. Second one is all about the people who produce our products. And the third one is all about the people who use our products. So this action on plastic work came under chapter 1, and it was kind of the hook. It was the big news story at the time when we launched Future of Food. So we launched this in Manchester. It was the same day as the Recoup conference. So I actually went and presented it in Peterborough at the Recoup conference on the same day as we launched this at the Victoria Baths in Manchester. So that was quite interesting. We had 6 goals as part of the Future of Food. First one was to make all of our packaging easy to recycle. Second one, to use a minimum of 50% recycled content in our rigid plastics, PET and HDPE. The reason we didn't go with 50% in polypropylene was because in order to be deemed recyclable through an EFSA approved process, 99% of that material has to come from previously food contact material. And a lot of polypropylene goes into non-food contact recycler. So whilst it is recycled, it doesn't go back into food contact polypropylene because we don't have a EFSA approved recycling system that is food safe. That's about to change, I think, but that's the reason that we only set that 50% commitment on the HDPE, which is the milk bottles, and PET, which is soft drinks and water. We put in a target to eliminate all non-detectable dark and black plastic, to eliminate plastic products which are not designed to be recycled or reused. So that's talking about the products there, not the packaging. So that again is things like wet wipes, carrier bags, cotton buds. We were actually the first retailer to switch to paper stemmed cotton buds about 20 years ago. We put in a target to work with partners to improve recycling rates. So that's doing things like this webinar, talking at industry events, talking to our customers, talking to our members, engaging with central and local governments. And then we also put in a target after the Blue Planet 2 and the Greenpeace report kicked off to reduce our plastic footprint by 15% by the end of 2022. And I'm just updating the numbers on that for last year, but I think we'll probably achieve that in 2021. So what does easy to recycle mean? People always say. for us, the definition is that it has one of these green swooshes on the back of pack. So this is the OPRL logo. We want to use recycle, which is all of your rigid PET, steel cans, glass bottles, paper packaging. And then there are a few specific logos that we use. Recycle with bags at large supermarkets for those PP and PE films. Recycle at coffee shop or recycling point for paper coffee cups with under 15% laminate on one side only. And then recycle at recycling point for beverage cans, which are collected. They are recycled in one plant, which is in Halifax. They go into cores that are used for flexible packaging and carpets, etc. So big industrial cores. That's what the beverage can material goes into. And then you're going to say, well, why do you accept film don't recycle? Well, up to this point, we were at about 80% with the green swoosh. The last 20% was the bit that was really hard to crack, which was those flexible films. So we decided that we couldn't change everything into polyethylene and maintain the functionality that we needed for those products. So we decided to start collecting that material ourselves through Instore film collections. So we did a 50-store trial, which was quite successful. And then we launched that into, it's now in over 80% of our stores. So some examples of other things that we did as part of this work. The one on the top left there is about PVC. So I mentioned about the chlorine in PVC being problematic to the recycling machinery. We worked with Cavaris at the time, this one was, to develop a lidding film innovation that seals onto PET rather than PE, with that PE seal layer. That was quite a big thing at the time. It was on the front cover of Packaging News, and we removed about 364 tons of PVC a year just from our cooked meats by doing that. An example of mixed polymer trays, the next one, top right. So if you look at the mince packaging, that was quite a difficult one to crack because we were getting small particles of mince which contaminate the sealing flange around the edge of the tray. When you use a PE seal layer, the PE kind of melts around any contamination and allows you to still form a seal. We struggled for quite a while on this one, but we managed to crack that by working with a company called Eastman Chemical to develop a PETG sealing layer on the lidding film, which is much more compatible with the PET. That one removed around 163 tons a year of mixed material trays just from our mince lines. And we won a Star Pack Sustainability Award for that in 2017. The bottom left, that's an example of where we've removed carbon black. So carbon black is the additive that prevents those materials from being detected through near infrared detection. The feeling at the time was that for sushi, you really want to have a dark coloured base because you need to be able to see the contrast between the product and the base background of the packaging. It added a premium feel. It was what all of the retailers used for tiering at the time. All of the premium products were in this carbon black. And we coined this term vanity black because it was only there really to make it look nice. It didn't add any technical functional value other than making it look pretty. So we decided to move to a clear base, but in order to keep the premium look, the one on the right hand side of that picture is where you can see a reverse printed card sleeve that goes around the outside. So the colour that you can see in the background is not from the tray, it's from a reverse print on the sleeve which goes around it. And when we moved that packaging format, we actually saw the sales increase by 34%. And that removed just that product, sushi, removed 19 tons of black plastic undetectable. And then finally polystyrene. So yogurt pots used to be made from polystyrene. but we also used to use expanded polystyrene just in one product line, which was our pizza discs. So the image there was my first job as a hand model in the Independent, where we launched these cardboard discs. And you can just about see it on the picture, but that was quite a long time developing the pattern of cut and crease on those card discs. They're a corrugated disc, they're not a solid board disc. But what happens in pizza plants, if you imagine a pizza factory is quite a wet, warm place. You've got wet dough coming in at one end and you've got a big oven, big spiral oven at the other end of the plant. So you're getting a lot of fluctuations in humidity and temperature. If you put paper, especially corrugated fiberboard, into that sort of environment, it's just going to curl up straight away. So that image that you can see there, and if you ever wondered why we put those fancy designs on the back of those cardboard discs, it's to stop them curling up in the hoppers before they're being fed into the production line. So just that innovation alone took us about 3 years to develop, with this innovative cut and crease pattern to prevent the warp. That, you know, we got a lot of coverage on that, and that removed about 200 tons of polystyrene, expanded polystyrene, which is obviously 200 tons of expanded material is a lot more than any other rigid plastic without the foaming effect. Some other things that we did a bit more recently, so paper laminates, we still do use paper laminates. We've got them all in line with recyclability guidance from OPRL at the moment, which is that they should have less than 15% plastic to paper ratio, and they should be laminated on one side only, which allows the water to get to the fiber side when they get into the recycling plant. So that applies to things like cookie bags, the skillets that we use for sandwiches, and bags that we use for premium sandwiches, but also sachets for sauce mixes, couscous and cooked soups. Those sachets took a long time and a lot of development to get that to work. Previously, they had an aluminium layer in them. They had about 20% plastic. The supplier had been using the same material on the same machines for the last 40 years. You know, resistance to change in that environment is quite strong, but we managed to get there. At the top right, it talks about compostable materials. So we get a lot of people who say, why can't you make everything compostable and then it'll just go away? It's not quite as simple as that, because the majority of food waste, which is where compostable material would have to go, doesn't go to composting. It goes to anaerobic digestion. If you bolt on a secondary process at the back of the digester to be able to compost the digestate, then that works, but there are not many of those in existence in the UK at the moment. So we have very limited examples of where we use compostable materials in our home brand packaging. Like I say, tea bags, carrier bags and fruit labels are the only 3 examples. Plastic cutlery, that's another example where we used to use black. We've moved those now into wood. To try and get wood into a pack in a high care food production plant is quite a challenge. So that took a lot of hazard analysis to be able to get to that point. But we do now have a wooden fork in pack, and that both remove the carbon black and reduce the plastic, but it's really in line with the Single-Use Plastics Directive, which bans the use of plastic cutlery for single use. And then the very last thing that we did was those monomaterial skin packs, which you can see on the bottom right hand corner. So that is another one where it's a PET tray with a PE layer, but because these are skin packs where you're creating a vacuum in the top web and then you're sucking that down in a molten state onto the tray to create that skin. That skin pack technology is brilliant for food waste. It gives you about 28 days shelf life on those products. very, very difficult to change into a mono material. So that took a lot of R&D development during lockdown in Italy. So trying to get Italian engineers to go into factories during the COVID pandemic, put that project back by 18 months, I would say. We had to go straight back to the drawing board, test. We tested about 20 different materials in the R&D function in Italy with our packaging supplier, and eventually we found this material that works. So that was the last big one that we did just in time for the summer marketing campaign in July 2021. So from that 46%, we ended up in 2021 at around 80%. The last 20% of those materials, as I say, were the flexible plastics. So of your bread bags, sweet bags, crisp wrappers, any flexible plastic laminate, which by weight only makes up, I think it's about 6% of the total weight of our own brand packaging. But by SKU, remember we changed the way that we measure recyclability. By SKU, it's about 20% of all of the products that we sell. So we had to do something about that if we wanted to get to 100%. In terms of sort of tangible outputs from all of these targets that we put into place, these are the numbers as they stand at the moment. So packaging that we made easy to recycle, we reckon there's about 5,000 tons, which is 824 million pieces of plastic. In terms of introducing recycled content, about 2,000 tons, 80 million pieces of plastic. So we did that through specifying 50% recycled content in those rigid plastics. But what we found was that once the category had bought into it, to get them to buy into it was the hardest bit. But once they had bought into it, the category went away and sort of championed it. So on soft drinks, we now have 100% recycled content in water, soft drinks, mixers, juices. So almost all of our drinks, the only exception being dilutable cordials. And by the end of this year, the plan is to have dilutable cordials increased from the current 51% where they are now to 100%. And then all of our Co-op branded drinks will be in 100% recycled PET at that point. So recycled PET, about 2,000 tons currently. Black plastic and CPET, again about 1,800 tons. And in terms of that plastic removal piece, which we're a bit reluctant to do at the start, because there was always a thought that, well, plastic is a lightweight material, it's very efficient. We're working on developing recycling infrastructure. We don't really want to throw all that away and scrap all the plastic. But our product developers went away and started to work on these things independently. We identified opportunities to remove 6% to start with, and that was our first target that we set. But in terms of plastic reduction, over 3,500 tons now have been removed, about 516 million pieces of plastic in Co-op brand packaging every year. This is have either been removed altogether or reduced in weight. So I talked about the in-store collection trial. These are the bins that we tested in store. It was important that we had a nice wide aperture at the top of the bin so that customers that were coming in during the pandemic that didn't want to touch sides of the bin could just drop their packaging into the bin. We came up with this strap line of clean it, scrunch it, bin it. We asked customers to clean the material that they were bringing back. We didn't want any food waste contamination in there. Scrunch it was meant to imply that if you can roll it up into a ball, then it's the stuff that we want. So we didn't want any trays or bottles in there. We did get some of that material, but we discouraged it. And then all that material is sent on to our recycling partner, who we already used for back of store recycling. Because if you imagine cases of material coming into stores, they get a lot of shrink wrap, stretch wrap, sometimes shelf ready trays that are used in store that are already backhauled and recycled in the UK. So it made sense for us to use the recycling partner that we were already using for back of store recycling. We worked with Coop, the recycling charity that we've been members of for some time, to do a composition analysis from that trial. And what we found was that around a third of the material was polyethylene, 12% was polypropylene, some of it was mixed polyolefins, again about another 12%. Nearly a quarter of it was crisp bags, metallized films. We weren't sure at the start whether metallized films would be problematic to recycling, but we ran some separate trials with J-Plas, our recycling partner, and we found that the material was detectable, it was sortable with other polypropylenes, and it was recyclable. And the metallization on those metallized OPP films is atoms thick, so it doesn't really impact on the materials that they're being recycled into. Those materials go into things like the cases for hand dryers and extractor fans and stacking crates, those types of things. We had a very small amount of plastic nets, which can be problematic for recycling because it can get caught up on the conveyor belts. And then about 11% of the material was mixed plastics, which we put into construction boards. Some of it will be downcycled into things like park benches. And then we had about 5% of the material that was contamination. So the most interesting bit of contamination that we got was this child's slipper. And there was only one. So we don't know whether somebody saw that and thought, well, that's polyester, I'm sure that can be recycled with these soft plastics, or if some little kid lost a slipper and never got it back. So as I was saying, that film is worth about 6% of our material by weight. So that means that 94% of our materials are collected at curbside. About 6% of them now are collected in store. If you look at it by weight, the recycler that we work with recycles polyethylene into 3 streams: clear, lightly coloured, dark coloured. They go into different types of bags and sacks, all recycled and manufactured in the UK. And the polypropylene goes into those hand dryers and extractor fans, etc. There is a little bit of PET that we collect at back of store as well. So some of that rigid polyester does go to make secondary packaging, but the majority of the other material will go into board recycling for construction boards. It's an alternative to plywood. And we are looking at doing some trials with chemical recycling as well, which would take the material back to monomer to be able to manufacture it back into virgin polymer. So what we've learned from those trials is that we need to continue developing those films to make sure that we're getting that material out of the mixed plastics buckets into the higher value buckets. And eventually what we want to do is to try and get all that polyethylene and polypropylene monomaterial being recycled, probably through a chemical process, to go back into food contact packaging. So there's some quite exciting stuff going on in that field at the moment, but we're not quite there yet, but we continue to work on that. I was going to show you the video of the summer marketing campaign, but I'm sure you've all seen that. The marketing campaign was quite successful. We reached about 50 million people in the first week. One of the most successful social media campaigns that we've done at the Co-op. We found that 100% of people that we asked said it was a good idea. Normally with these things, you find that you get quite a lot of debate about, oh, well, you should be stopping selling plastic altogether. What about the carbon footprint? How can I be sure that that material isn't being shipped to Turkey? Well, actually, I was quite surprised by the fact that everybody we asked said that this was a good idea. I have got some more slides, which I'm just going to rattle through quickly because we're getting pushed for time. But over the last sort of 18 months under the pandemic, we've seen some new drivers coming out. So the new normal means that people are buying less ready meals, less soft drinks in single-use plastic bottles. So we're seeing changes in the material mix. We're seeing people being more rational towards plastics. People appreciate the health benefits and the food waste benefits that we get from using plastics. People are starting to become more conscious personally. So I've termed it normative responsibility in there, but it's all about isomorphism. So people sort of coming together, or organizations coming together and joining together in a single strategy to work for the common good, which we've seen through things like the UK Plastics Pact. And then the impact of regulation. So, you know, over the next 3 years, probably, we're going to see the plastics tax, which lands in April this year. We're going to see deposit returns schemes coming into force in Scotland and the rest of UK, possibly 2 separate schemes, which might be problematic. And we're going to have extended producer responsibility coming into force as well, which is going to increase the costs to businesses putting packaging on the market by about £3 billion. So that money, if the system works the way it should do, should be ring fenced for more recycling infrastructure, which is what's going to allow us to push beyond that 30% threshold that we found when we started to interview recyclers right at the beginning of this process. Climate change is a massive problem, and the value of packaging in preventing food waste needs to be protected. Removing plastic could have a bigger impact if it drives up food waste. We know that some alternatives to plastics do have higher carbon footprints. If you look at steel, aluminium, glass, all packaging materials have their place, but there are differences in terms of the climate impact. I think that will change over time as glass furnaces, for example, start to move to all electric melting and we decarbonise the grid. But at the moment, plastic does make sense from a carbon point of view in a lot of cases. For the Co-op, we've set a 10-point climate plan. We're aiming to get to net zero by 2040. Packaging makes up about 8% of our carbon footprint. If you compare that to the ingredients that we use in our product, ingredients and the associated land change through those ingredients makes up about 71% of our scope 3 emissions. So the value of that 8% in protecting food waste, which is the 71%, is really important. There are a lot of things we need to think about when you're looking at carbon impacts of different packaging materials. How many servings are in the pack? How much headspace is in the pack? What's the dead space on the pallet? What's the material type? What does it weigh? How is it being transported? How far? What's the percentage recycled content? How much energy and water is used in manufacturing it? What's the impact on food waste of using that material compared to something else? And how is it being disposed of at the end of its life? These are all really important factors when thinking about the materials that we need to use, weighing up plastic reduction benefits compared to carbon efficiency. So if you work in the food industry, or even if you just buy products, these are the questions that I would ask of your suppliers. How do I make my single-use plastics recyclable? How do I maximize the recycled materials in my packaging? Are the pigments in my plastics detectable, or are they just there for vanity? How can I improve the on-pack messaging that will help customers to reuse and recycle easily? Are all the components in my packaging really necessary? Is there anything I can remove without impacting on the functionality of this packaging? How can I contribute to those material reduction goals that we all need to work towards? How can packaging technology help to reduce food waste? Food waste is really important. You know, if it was a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of climate change gases after the USA and China. Going to work with partners to develop innovative product delivery systems for refill and reuse. And that's something that we've been looking at, but because of our convenience model, it's quite difficult to implement in the co-op. But I think it's something that we will have to face into in the future. And what can I do to reduce the carbon intensity of this packaging? So I hope you found that useful. I'm going to end the presentation there. Do we have any questions?
Rob, before we go to questions, I'll just say thank you. That was fascinating. Really great to see the progress you've made. You and the co-op have obviously been very busy. And
yeah, hashtag it's what we do. So you know, this is my day job. I think for a lot of other retailers, this would be like, you know, you might have a day a week or one person in a team working on this, but this has been my day job for the last 5 years. Indeed, and I hope the co-op gets the credit it deserves for as I say, the progress that you've made so far. There were a few glitches on the screen. We had those black bars which we tried to get rid of. I hope that didn't detract from the presentation. I don't think it did. The content was clearly there and very impressive. So there were lots of questions. We don't have a great deal of time for questions, but I'll hand over to my colleague David Blake to take us through those. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Phil, and particularly Robert, which was something I found very interesting. We have got a raft of questions. Some of them I think you've probably answered through your presentation, and some of them are duplicated. So I'll go through them one by one and see how we get on. Hi, sorry I missed the intro, but why is the recycling films and trays still seems to elude us? I think you've answered that by saying we can do it.
Yeah, so it is. We know that it's technically possible. Part of it's all driven by economics. So trays currently do have usually between 80 and 100% recycled content in them. That material is all coming from bottles. So when we get DRS and we start to recycle bottles back into bottles, that material that goes into trays will start to dry up. So that's when the things that we've been doing on removing those sealing layers is going to start to get really important to the tray manufacturers, and they're going to start to push that onto their customers to say, you know, we need more recycled content for things like the plastics tax, and therefore we need to sell you this tray that doesn't have a sealing layer on it. Films, again, it's all about whether it is profitable to the waste management companies that are contracted by local authorities to collect that material and recycle it. It's probably not at the moment, but that's why we need that £3 billion a year that's going to be coming from extended producer responsibility to be spent on more recycling infrastructure.
Okay, we've got two questions which I'll join together, in fact. It says, in many areas, we are aware that our careful domestic segregation activities is just a waste of time because it's all lumped in together by the local authority. And also, you know, what are you doing about guaranteeing that staff actually deal correctly with the soft plastics which are returned? It also said I heard that some recyclers say we shouldn't bother with domestic segregation, or in fact with the commercial segregation, because they should segregate it all themselves. What's your view on that?
So what tends to happen, you can see this online, if you look on YouTube, you'll be able to see some near infrared detection facilities in action. What generally happens is that the materials go through a belt where a beam of near infrared light is shined down onto the conveyor, and then air blowers blow off the materials into separate hoppers. So it all depends on how your local authority and their waste contractor have their contract set up. If they have segregated collection and that material is sent from your bin that just contains polypropylene through into a wagon that just contains polypropylene and goes straight to the polypropylene recycling plant, then that's fine. But what generally happens is that all that material goes in together and it's sorted by near infrared detection, which is why removing that carbon black master batch was so important. In terms of making sure that our staff do the right thing in stores, we've implemented quite a lot of measures to make sure that people know what they need to do in store. We've given the training manual out to all the store managers. We collect the front of store material in yellow bags and the back of store material in a different coloured bag, so that when we start to segregate those materials and we have front of store and back of store, so that we can maximise the value coming from the back of store recycler, which is mostly polyethylene, higher value generally because it's transparent, not printed, and the front of store material, which in the future we will probably need to put into chemical recycling when that's available. So yeah, it's all about the communication and having the processes in place to be able to segregate the materials.
Okay, we've had one suggestion that your talk should be turned into an Horizon program and go out on mainstream TV. So you've made a good impression. What's your current understanding with printed sleeves regarding the contamination that the inks cause?
So contamination of inks on sleeves getting into PET probably isn't a big problem, because as I was saying during the presentation, if you use the same material, that material will be blown off when it gets to the drying section of the wash line, generally, from what I've seen anyway. If you use a different material, the PET is going to end up in with the polyethylene, as an example. And when that material then is shredded and it goes through the sink float process at the recycling plant, it's going to be separated out at that point. So I don't think you would ever really get ink contamination in the PET. If you're talking about migration, chemical migration, any recycled material that goes back into food contact has to go through an EFSA approved process, which is audited, and there are sort of specific migration limits for all plastic materials under EU 10/2011 is the European legislation, which is being migrated into UK law at the moment.
Okay, a short question here: why are fruit labels plastic?
It's probably cheaper. It's a simple answer. Easy to print. If you put fruit in the fridge, the ink doesn't rub off. You know, those labels really were used when we used to use PLU codes, which was price lookup codes. So if you remember back in the old days when I worked on a till, you had to type in 3271 and it brought up that it was a Braeburn apple. But now they tend to either have barcodes on, or they're just used to denote that it is a pink lady apple rather than a Braeburn apple. So yeah, like I was saying, we've been moving all those into compostable materials because we know that they go into food waste. Whilst most food waste does go into anaerobic digestion, the outputs from that digestate, if they're spread on land, it's much better to have a less persistent label going through that process, because compostable materials, even though they don't compost on land, they will maybe only last for 5 years compared to a polypropylene label, which might last for 500 years. Okay.
There's a question here about what sort of packaging do you use to transport your products to the shops? And are these also recyclable, reusable? I assume that you don't have total control over how people send you stuff in bulk.
We do specify what materials we want to use for both primary and secondary and tertiary packaging. We use a lot of corrugated cardboard, and that is all recycled back into new corrugated cardboard with DS Smith. All of our shrink film and stretch film is polyethylene and all goes back into bags and sacks generally, but all recycled again in the UK. About half of our products probably use returnable crates, and we're going through a process now. We've been trialing it for a long time, but replacing the stretch wrap that we use on cages when we're sending materials out from depot to store with a reusable strap that will go around the cage, so that you're taking out the single-use material altogether.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if you want to answer this one, but do you know, this is Lewis, how do you know how the other supermarkets compare? In other words, can you rank them? In other words, does Co-op actually promote itself as the best sort of recycler?
Well, Co-op being a member-owned organisation, we tend to play it down a little bit, but if you go on any industry calls, people tend to talk about what the Co-op do as best practice. And it's, in many ways, we're privileged because we don't have to report to shareholders. Our shareholders are our members, and all of our profits go into good causes. So, we have the mandate from our members to spend our members' money on this stuff. During the projects, we were spending millions of pounds developing these things. Whereas in other supermarkets, that money might have been directed into other things. So, yeah, Co-op does well, but I think it's because we are a Co-op.
Yeah, okay. I think it's more of a general comment, but you may have a view on this. Whilst the Co-op has made all this effort to make its packaging more recyclable, we still only see a modest 30% materials being recycled in the UK. What do you think will be the silver bullet to make this percentage go higher?
Extended producer responsibility, without a doubt. The plastics tax is coming in April this year. That will only tax anything that has less than 30% recycled content in it. That's already possible now for most materials. So it's not going to drive a lot of behaviour change. But I think when EPR comes in, so what will happen with EPR is we will have modulated fees. So currently we buy PRNs, 1 ton of PRN for every ton of material that we put on the market. EPR will increase that by 10 times cost. So we'll be talking sort of tens of millions of pounds impact on a company like the Co-op. And for bigger retailers, even more than that. So that, again, that economic incentive is what's going to drive the recyclability, and the money that is raised from EPR should then be used to fund more domestic infrastructure, and you're building a virtuous cycle that way.
Okay. Your recycling focus is great, and most people seem to be very positive about it. What are you doing about matriculating the distance travelled by your products? In other words, is the packaging just one issue, and should we do something about the number of truck miles that deliver the stuff to the stores?
Yeah, definitely. So if you remember the slide that I showed about the carbon impact of packaging, it's only 8% of our products. 71% comes from the ingredients and the change of land use. Logistics makes up around 10% carbon footprint. So we've now offset all of our scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions as a business. So we only use renewable energy in our stores and refrigeration, for example. But we do need to work on the rest of the scope 3 emissions, and we've chunked it up into kind of 5-year targets to become carbon neutral by 2040. But we are working hard on that.
Okay. In other European areas, there's a commitment to get a refund on cans and bottles returned to the shop. I know you said that you were sort of thinking about that in the future. Is that something you're going to be taking on seriously?
Yeah, every retailer will have to do that in Scotland in about 18 months' time. And we think that the rest of UK will follow soon after that. If you want to know more about that, have a look at the Environment Act, which gained royal assent at the end of last year. The enabling legislation is just going through at the moment, but yeah, deposit return schemes will become law in the UK in the next 2 to 3 years. Okay.
And there's another comment. What's considered single-use plastic in 2022? Presumably, we haven't sort of got rid of the idea of single-use plastics just yet.
Yeah, so our definition of single-use plastic is in line with the European Single-Use Plastics Directive. That's where I would go for a definition, which is basically anything that is not designed to do the same thing that it was designed for in multiple trips. So recycling doesn't count if you recycle a material, it's still single use.
Yeah.
If you have a box that you take your sandwiches to work in every day, that is reusable. It's not single use. So yeah, single use plastic is still a thing. All of our recyclable materials are single use.
Okay. What are you? We know nowadays that people put the labels on food, example, telling how much salt, vinegar, and sugar, and other sorts of stuff is in there, fat in particular. What's your thought about putting something on about reducing plastic waste and the amount of CO2 emitted by the plastics?
Yeah, so again, that is something that's going to come through under the Environment Act. I think there will be an eco label mandated under the Environment Act at some point. We don't yet know whether we'll need to put on the carbon footprint of the packaging, but we will definitely need to put the carbon footprint of the product.
Okay. There's a question here. Can you say something more about the sort of the plastic directive? In other words, is it something people can look up on or Google it or something or other?
Yeah, it's openly available on the EU legislation system. Just type in EU Single-Use Plastics Directive. I can't remember the number of the directive, but you'll soon find it. The various administrations in the UK are now doing consultations on various aspects of the directive. So the directive was the thing that said that you can no longer sell single-use plastic plates. You can't sell single-use plastic cutlery in the EU, for example. So for a company like us that manufactures in the UK but exports to Northern Ireland, in a post-Brexit world, that means that anything that we send to Northern Ireland has to automatically comply with the EU Single-Use Plastics Directive. So whilst we've left the EU, we still need to comply with that. It talks about things like oxo-degradable additives, which are put into plastics. Those are now banned in the EU. So these are materials that in the past were seen to be a good thing, but what they actually do is they just break down polymers into smaller and smaller fractions.
Okay.
It doesn't actually go away, it just becomes microplastics.
Okay. Time's getting on. We've still got absolutely loads of questions, some of which are copies of others, and some which really comment more than questions. So I'm just going to sort of end this on a couple of short things. In other words, is there an initiative that supermarkets work together? So it's not just the co-op sort of forging a new route ahead. Is for example Waitrose and Marks and Spencers and all the others going to come and work with you?
Yeah, so I talked about isomorphism, and that is very much in evidence in terms of the UK Plastics Pact. Every retailer apart from Iceland is signed up to the UK Plastics Pact. So that has set targets to make all packaging recyclable by 2025, to use at least 30% recycled content in plastics on average, to make sure that 70% of plastic is recycled, and to eliminate any problematic and unnecessary plastic items. So we didn't initially join the UK Plastics Pact because we'd set our own targets a couple of years before that, and they went further and faster. But we did eventually join the UK Plastics Pact and told everybody else how to do it.
Yeah, there's been I'll let Phil come back in and interrupt me in a minute, but been a lot of comments about food packaging and how much you wash it before you recycle it. Is there any way of saying, if it's got 50% contamination, you can't recycle it, or is it just sort of common sense as to what can be recycled and what has to be washed completely?
Yeah, generally a smear is okay for paper. For plastics, a quick rinse should be enough. Most of those materials, especially things like aluminium and glass and steel, which are molten, contamination isn't that much of an issue, really. The main benefit of rinsing your packaging is that when you bring it back to store for soft plastics collection, we're not sitting on loads of manky stuff in our shop with rats running around the store.
Okay. I think Phil, I'm going to hand back to you because the time is now 20 to 8, and there's absolutely loads of questions, but you know, a lot of them are repeats of what we've already asked. So I'll hand back to you, Phil. Thank you very much indeed, Robert. It's been very interesting.
You're welcome.
Dave, for taking us through the questions, and thank you, Robert, for a fascinating presentation. It's really great to see the progress you've made and the journey that you've been on with the co-op, and the persistence that you've shown in dealing with the technical challenges, which it seems some supermarkets find just too hard still. Again, thank you very much. Okay, so that brings us to the end of tonight's presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you found it interesting. I think the comments, very positive comments on the chat panel, suggest that it was much appreciated by everyone on board. So please keep an eye out for our future events here at the IET Cambridge. David, you've got a point?
Yeah, very quick one. There's been requests about whether the video recording is going to be available. I will email everybody who's signed up to this event with details of where to get the video from, which won't be available for 4 or 5 days. We'll put it up on the YouTube site as quick as possible. And if there's any slides, we'll publish those as well. And I will email everybody who's signed up to tell them when it's available.
Thanks, David. Let's bring things to a close and say, on behalf of the IET Cambridge Network, thank you, Robert. Thank you, David and Annie, for helping the presentation. And we will hope to see you all again at our next event. Thank you very much. And you can all disconnect from this Zoom presentation now. Thank you.